Welcome to another episode of the Everyday Expertise Podcast. I'm your host, Roland Martin, and I hope that today's conversation will expand your knowledge. Today I welcome Steve Martin to the show. Steve is my uncle, who spent many years managing the retail operation at Martin's Family Fruit Farm. After agreeing to be one of the guests on my podcast, he suggested that instead of doing another episode on the career of someone that worked at Martin's Family Fruit Farm, he could instead share lessons that he's learned from his experiences serving on many different boards. And I was quite happy to take him up on his suggestion. We begin by talking about his career, how he got his first position on a board, and the different types of boards that he has sat on. For the last 45 minutes, Steve does a great job of sharing important lessons that he has learned from his experiences and gives good suggestions for board members and others to think about. I hope that you will enjoy it and learn from his expertise. Welcome, Steve, to Everyday Expertise. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
It's good to be here, Roland. I am looking forward to our time together here this morning.
All right. So tell me a little bit. What are your days looking like currently, or what's keeping you busy right now?
My days right now are very relaxed. I've probably never been this relaxed in my life, or at least not since my early to middle teenage years.
Okay, yeah.
It's kind of funny. I've never been early retirement was never on my bucket list. Mm-hmm. It wasn't something that I dreamed of, or even that it was a goal of mine. I always kind of even scoffed a little bit at the idea that people would be retire in their 50s. I just thought, that's actually a sign of laziness.
Okay, yeah.
But when the opportunity was given to me, my brother Kevin, president of Martin's,
mm-hmm.
Gave me this deal, this opportunity, mm-hmm. that it was just too good to say no to.
Okay, yeah.
I took another look at it, and it just seemed that everything was falling into place, and that seemed to be a very clear direction that's the way I should go right now, even though the future isn't exactly all open to me.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. What it all means.
Right.
I just saw it as a door to go through in faith that whatever is next will become apparent.
Nice.
And so in the meantime here, I'm just really enjoying it.
So how long has it been since you officially retired now?
Officially, my last day of official work or responsibilities at Martin's was on the 29th of May, I believe.
Okay.
So the end of May. So it's been about 3.5 months.
Okay, yep.
And, I kind of assumed that for 3 months I would have no problems at all. And then after that, that's where I kind of saw that maybe...
Like you'll start getting bored, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
It hasn't been that way.
Oh, really?
Yet.
Okay.
Oh, no,
that's good, yeah.
3 months just flew by.
Nice.
And it's like I feel like I barely really even got started on some of the things that I was hoping to do.
Okay, yeah.
And my days, probably a busy person would kind of look at my days and kind of laugh and say, really, you call that a full day? I'll admit it doesn't take as much to make a full day as what it did at one time.
Right, yeah.
But I know I've been finding things to do and just kind of living a day at a time, mm-hmm. and really enjoying it.
Nice, yeah. So what are maybe this you can fill in some of your hobbies or interests that you have here, but what are some of the things that you've been doing in the last few months since you've been retired?
So I've been doing some reading.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do as much reading as I used to, partly because of my eyes.
Okay, yeah.
And that was also a factor in my early retirement, my eyesight is not getting better. I'm just on the verge right now of, if it would get any worse, I would lose my license.
Okay, yeah.
Which, would have quite an effect, obviously, on what I would do or be able to do.
Yeah.
But the good side on that is that I do have a consultation booked with my retina specialist in November, where he's looking at the possibility of doing cataract surgery. That's
Okay.
the reason. It's cataracts that is causing
Okay.
the issue at this point. And because of other conditions of my eyes, they've always been slow to even consider surgery.
Okay.
Because there's extra complications
Gotcha.
involved. However, he is at this point saying he's quite optimistic that it would work and that it'll make the situation better. So I'm waiting for that final verdict. And just hoping and praying that it'll be better, but trying to be ready for whatever comes. So reading, maybe not as much. At one point I was a very avid reader, did a lot of it, and then as you get more and more busy in life, you maybe don't have quite as much time, but still always enjoyed picking up a book. Been doing maybe a little bit more than I had been in the past, even if it's just listening to books,
Right. Yeah.
reading
I mean,
them.
that's
And been doing a fair bit of walking.
nice.
I'm not the walker that I know you are. I don't run anymore, and I don't walk near as much as your dad does. But I like to get in 3 or 4 decent walks in a week if I can.
Nice. Yeah.
We've been doing a little bit of traveling, just within Ontario. Obviously, we can't
Yeah,
go further
right
than
now,
that.
yeah.
But we've been getting to know Ontario
Okay.
better and seeing parts of Ontario that I didn't even know existed,
Nice.
and really enjoying that.
Like just short trips, like a few
short
days.
trips, a few days here, a few days there. Sometimes even just day trips.
Right. Yeah.
We just last week we were out in Eastern Ontario.
Okay.
And spent a week or 3 or 4 days in the Perth area.
Nice.
And then came back through Prince Edward County, and went across a ferry that I didn't even know existed.
Okay.
Stuff like that. We just it's been fun to get to know our own province a little
nice.
bit better.
Well, if you're limited to your home province, probably Ontario isn't a bad place to get to explore. Like, it's big and
It really is not a bad. It's we talk about it all the time that if we were traveling from another area and we were going through some of the varied scenery that we have
Right,
here in
yeah.
Ontario, we think it was wonderful.
Yeah.
But
Very true.
when you live in it, you kind of
you're used to
yeah,
it.
you get used to it, whatever. But Ontario it's a big place, and it's a beautiful province.
Yeah.
And we've been doing some of that. The other thing that I've been working on, the first month or two I spent cleaning out my office
Okay,
and kind of getting things in place and so on. But Martin's is next year. We'll be celebrating their 50th anniversary since Dad planted the first trees in 71. And so I've actually been spending a bit of time just writing down and documenting and collecting some of that history.
Okay. Fascinating.
Whether anything will be done with it or not, who knows? But at least it'll be on paper for future people to look at, or for research or whatever.
Right.
So I figured now is probably as good a time to do that as any. Writing isn't my first love.
Okay.
But if I have no deadlines and can just spend the time out of the one. So I've been making some headways on that. I've got a fair bit of material written down already, and still working at that whenever I feel like it. So
Okay, yeah.
So between those things and helping Rose a bit more, I've been helping her with some canning projects
Nice,
and
yeah.
things like that I've never really done before. Just yesterday I peeled a bushel of pears and
Okay, yep.
just spending time with my grandkids. There's 4 of them now, with a 5th one on the way, and yeah, those are all things that I'm just enjoying right now.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. Yeah, and it's when I asked you to come onto the podcast here and asked you if you have any suggestions for what you're going to talk about, which is serving on a board and kind of some of the things to do with that. Um, did the fact that you're retired now, did that kind of influence that decision, or make you think more about that? Because are you still serving on boards and things like that as you move into your career here?
Yes, so presently I'm still serving on 2 different boards.
Okay.
I retired from 2 just within the last year.
Okay.
So I had up until February. Actually, I came off 2 in February. So up until February, I was on 4 at that point, and it just so happened that my terms expired on 2 of them in February. So I'm still on 2. Not in an executive position on either of those 2. That was the other thing. So I also came off as being chair of the one board in February as well. So my load really dropped all at once.
So the one you're still on, you're no longer chairman.
I'm not chair of that one anymore. Gotcha. Which we'll talk about that a bit later. About some of my views on those types of things, and why I see although I enjoyed my time in that particular board in a chair position, I see problems with the one person holding that position indefinitely, or even for the length of time that he's on the board. I think a good board actually can vary that position and so on. So in this particular board, which I'll maybe talk about a bit more later, it was a case where I was brought on for my board experience.
Okay.
And there certainly were other board members on there that had very definite leadership capabilities, but just didn't have the experience. And I actually saw it as kind of my duty to make sure that they not only get board experience, but that they get some chance to lead out and get some experience.
Right, yeah.
That, because,
that makes sense, yeah.
I see some of them as being very good future leaders in other endeavors as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe this would be a good time to kind of ask you about your story, what you want to share from it. So if you want to talk a little bit about your career, what you were doing up to this point, and then also I'd like to hear a little bit about kind of how you got started on serving on boards, and kind of how you developed and how you learned that that's something that you enjoyed, something that you're good at. I remember being in a meeting or something with you a few years ago when we were introducing ourselves, and I remember that you saying that you enjoy serving on boards. I didn't know if I'd ever heard anyone come out and say that before, so I thought that was quite unique. So I'm kind of interested in hearing kind of how that started and how it's developed over the years. So I guess I'll let you start where you think it's relevant to share a little bit about your history, your story, and what's gotten you to this point.
Sure. So, my story more or less starts as on the Martin farm.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I was born, where I grew up, and where I lived all of my life, really, except for a year that I lived out west, where I taught school out in Alberta for a year. But other than that, I've literally lived on this property or right beside it for my whole life.
Right.
I was the oldest in a family of 8, and we initially, Dad was a hog farmer. That's what I remember initially growing up with, is having the pigs and doing chores and so on. I went to a private Christian school in the area from grade 2 on. Grade 1, that's when I was in grade 1 in 69. That school hadn't started yet, only started when I was in grade 2.
Okay.
And did all of my years up to grade 10 in private Christian schools. I would have, my preference would have been to complete my high school. And Dad, I remember him even telling me that he would like if I could finish high school.
Okay.
That would have been kind of his first choice. However, it was at a time where he was extremely busy with church work. His involvement in the church at that point in time was just really expanding and growing. He was on a number of different boards that he was serving on, and the Apple business was just starting to take off a little bit at that point, when I was like, the year I would have turned 16.
Okay.
It definitely was not anything like it is today, but it was just starting to pick up a little bit.
Okay.
We were doing just a little bit of wholesaling into some local grocery stores and things like that. And my dad just could not see his way through how he was going to be able to do his church work and board work on top of running an expanding farm organization without my help here at home.
Right.
And so he pled with me if I would consider working full time on the farm and putting off my education for the time being, with the idea that maybe in a few years, and I think initially it was like, well, maybe when Ken is done grade 10, then I could maybe go back and finish my high school. The other kind of compromise or carrot that he threw in was that in the winter months, I could take some time off and go to Bible school.
Mm-hmm.
And I would classify myself as being a fairly social person. And so that idea of going to, Bible school, even if it was just, for a month or two in the winter, was intriguing to me. And so I just kind of looked at it and said, okay, well, I think I can live with that for the time being. So at that point, the Bible school that I attended out in Minnesota, Maranatha, you actually could attend as a 16-year-old. So I just went for 1 3-week term that first year, kind of to see if I liked it, and also because I was just 16. I was pretty young. But I really enjoyed it, and for the next 3 years, I went back every year for a 6-week term. And then in 84, I was asked to teach school out in Alberta, southern Alberta, in the Raymond, Lethbridge area. And I I chose that. Teaching actually was kind of what I would have considered to be my dream job.
Okay.
If I, at that point, would have been asked, what I want to do with my life, I would have said, yeah, I think I'd like to teach. But I also knew that to do that, I would have wanted to go back to school and
Right.
to do it right. But I also, I wasn't quite willing to make that jump without actually seeing if this was for me. And so when I was given this opportunity to teach, and really, in a large extent, what I consider what I did out there was more tutoring than teaching.
Okay.
But it was a program. They had a program that was kind of a self-learning type thing,
yeah.
and I was there to make sure that they were meeting their goals and to help where I could. And so I looked at it as a great opportunity. To see if this in fact would be for me. Went down to Virginia for a week of training with the CLE program thing there, and then headed out west for the year. And I enjoyed that year, really did. At the end of the year, toward the end of the year, they asked if I would come back another year. The one thing that I did not enjoy, and that was that I noticed that my eyesight was actually suffering.
Okay.
Just the strain of constantly reading and being in books. I did just in that year. I noticed a deterioration. And
Okay.
when I came back, I think I had an eye doctor appointment when I was home for Christmas. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly, but I remember my doctor telling me that if I kept on doing this, that I would be blind by the time I was 40.
Okay.
And that scared me.
Yeah.
It really, really scared me. And I kind of said, okay, well, maybe this is not for me, even though it was kind of giving up a little bit.
Right, yeah.
So I actually enjoyed the work. And I think had it not been for that, I would have probably maybe taught another year just to be fair to them, and then very likely possibly gone back to school.
Okay.
But life throws different curves at
Right.
you and different things, and that was one of them. And so instead I came back. I did go to Bible school one more year in 85.
Okay.
Just more or less to finish and to graduate. So I got my diploma there. And then I started dating a local girl here, Rosemary. And in 87, we got married, bought a trailer, and moved it onto the farm here where we lived for the first 3 years.
Okay.
And then in 1990, we bought Grandma's place. Grandpa had died in 85, but they had a retirement home at the end of the laneway. So we bought their place, and Grandma bought our trailer. They moved it up against the house, the farmhouse, so she could be closer to Mom and Dad. And that's where we've lived ever since. That's where we raised our family of 4 kids. And I've worked at Martin's from then up until a few months ago, as I said earlier.
So what, just give me a brief description of kind of what was your role, at least at the end here at Martin's. What were you involved in?
So at the end, in the last 10 years or so, my involvement was primarily with retail.
Okay.
So my title was retail sales manager. And I ran the store, the farm market on the farm, and was in charge of getting so obviously we grow the apples, but we handled we ran a full line like all Ontario produce when
Right.
it was in season. We carried in the stores. So my job was procuring that product, bringing it to the store, and managing the store. Earlier in the my life of work, I mean, it started out more or less doing everything.
Okay.
I always was a little bit. I mean, the retail end of it, the farmers market and so on, was kind of what I was from the time I was 16 on.
Okay.
Was kind of my thing from
Yep.
the time I could drive. The minute I could drive, that was, Dad still came to the market some, but not very much
Okay.
after that point. And so that was always kind of my thing. But I also, initially in the early years of the business, the other part that was I did some deliveries and things like that, but I was primarily in charge of the books. So
Okay.
I started out, there was a time when my title was office manager, and that involved payroll, it involved HR, it involved sales, just about everything was in there. I kind of laugh sometimes. I'd go through the office there at Martin's sometimes, and I would kind of kiddingly shake my head at some of them, say, I have no idea what you guys all do all day, because I used to do all of this.
Used to be in charge of all of these
Yeah,
offices.
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, not just in charge of it, I did it.
Yeah, you did it, yeah.
And he, like up until 93, we got our first computers at Martin's in 93.
Okay. Wow.
And up until that point, it was all manual, even payroll. Like we had, we were doing, if you count all the part-time in those last years, we were doing T4s for over 100 people.
Wow.
And that was all totally manual.
Like writing it, filling in.
Filling it out.
Wow.
It was, there was, I sometimes shake my head and I wonder how in the world did I possibly do all of that in that time. And by today's standards, it probably wasn't all done, as professionally as what we would expect, today.
Right.
However, it was done with, in my mind, with the best tools that we had at the time and had available to us, and it wasn't all bad. I mean, I learned a lot about work ethic and about dealing with people and all of those things in that time period, and picked up a lot of valuable experience that I will never regret.
No, I'm sure. And just as you were kind of talking about some of the things that you were involved in there, I think about the tremendous opportunity I had as a teenager to work for you at Market for many summers, and I often think about the really good experience that was, and what all I've learned from that too. So
yeah, that was actually a side benefit. I feel like I got to know a lot of my nieces and nephews better because of that, because a lot of them did work for me at least for a summer or two, and some like you for quite a few summers. There were parts about that sometimes that were stressful. We were often very busy at Market and so on, and I probably drove you a bit hard at times.
Well, I remember the last few years we were starting at 3 a.m. often to get set up in time.
Those were long hours,
wow.
and often I had often put in my 50 to 60 hours before we ever started on Saturday morning. So
I know.
They were long weeks and long days, but I don't regret them. It was good. And yes, there are things about, I often said that, give me a young person for 3 or 4 months at Market, and let me watch him and observe how he does and so on. And I will tell you almost for sure how he will do in whatever career he takes.
Okay,
And there were young people that went on to be engineers and lawyers and, well, teachers, at least ministers, pastors, different things that went on to do different things, and invariably, yeah, I could pretty well tell you how successful they were gonna be by how they did it, Mark.
Interesting.
And so they're just the skills that you learn. You learn people skills.
Right.
You learn money skills.
Yep.
And manual math skills, all
Yeah.
kinds of things that you learn from that. So it's a good learning experience
Yeah,
for kids.
no, that's for sure. Yeah, no, it was a great experience for me, that's for sure. Yeah, so when did you get asked or get appointed to serve on a board for the first time, or where did that kind of start?
Yeah, so again, I guess some of it started out initially with the fact that I was doing some of the PR work and so on for Martin's.
Okay, yep.
That also kind of was part of some of what I did. I should say that it didn't take too long into my career to discover that while I enjoyed business, I enjoyed the a lot of aspects of business.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't take me real long to also see that I was not, though, necessarily cut out to be a businessman per se.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that along with myself and my brothers and dad, when we would sit down and discuss projects and new things and different things, I tended to be the one that would look at what all could go wrong.
Oh, yeah, gotcha.
I don't consider myself a pessimist. I like to call it realism.
Yeah.
But I'm certainly less of a risk taker.
Okay.
Than what
yeah.
There's a sense where a business person has to be willing to take some risks.
Right.
It just is that way. I wouldn't say I'm totally adverse to risks. I can certainly be convinced.
Mm-hmm.
And I, tried to be a team player over the years. And when we would decide on a project, I didn't sit around and question it or say, okay, this was a dumb idea or whatever. Right. I tried to be supportive even when I had questions about stuff. But I'll be the first to admit that our business would not have grown nearly to the extent it had, and maybe wouldn't even exist today had I been in charge.
Okay.
And I saw that fairly early on, that my role was more of a support role in that sense. At the same time, I did like and do like the challenge of being involved in projects and in even new projects and so on. I like seeing where things can go and so on. And I think maybe one of my first experiences on a board, or it was almost more of a committee type thing.
Okay.
It wasn't a real formal thing. We had been asked to be part of a I'm not even sure what the organization was called or if it had an official name, but what they did is they oversaw farm visits. So they basically went and asked a bunch of farms whether they would be willing to open their farms to the public on a particular day.
Okay.
And then it would be advertised, promoted as such, and participants could start off at any one of the 6 or 7 or 8 farms that
Okay,
might have been on the route, and they'd be given a map, and they could start then, and then they could do the route and visit these different farms on a kind of as they went around, and then some farms would have a guided tour, other farms would kind of have your, you would do your own kind of tour through the farm depending how they had it set up.
Okay. So this was to try to get people informed of farms?
It was to be an educational thing as to what's involved, to get people to appreciate where their food comes from, and so on. Was kind of the whole idea behind it.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking, this was like back in the, I'm thinking early 90s maybe, where this was being done. And late 80s, early 90s. I don't have exact dates, but somewhere around there. And our farm was asked to be a part of this the first year that they did it. And then somehow through that, I was asked to sit on the committee that planned future events as well. So I'm not sure how that happened. I think the first year we were just automatically, any farm that was involved was at the meetings to help plan it. And then for some reason, I was asked to stay on to help plan future ones, even though not all of the farm. And I don't remember exactly how that happened, but that's kind of how it was. And so that was kind of, I think, my first formal introduction to a committee or board work as such, other than maybe being involved in some committees or whatever at a church level and so on. But that was kind of really my first, outside of that, my first formal board work. And there's kind of a funny story that goes with that. One of the other committee members was a lady by the name of Kelly Daynard. I don't know, she was probably around maybe even a little bit younger than me. She went on to lead an organization, I think called Food Care or whatever, that kind of tries to educate people on how food is produced and all of that within Ontario. I'm not sure what she's doing at this point, but she kind of actually went into a vocation that centered around this.
Yeah, interesting.
But some years later, many years later, but it would be 10 to 15 years ago now, she asked me to give a talk to on a yearly basis, they did a tour for a bunch of media people out of the Toronto area. They bring a busload of them into the area and visit different farms, kind of in what we did way back then, kind of in that line, but it was very specific to this busload of professional writers or media people. And she had asked me specifically to give a talk on that road. I was to be they had speakers over lunch as well. While they had lunch, and this was out in Stratford, and so I was asked to be one of those speakers. And when she introduced me, she introduced me as someone that, some 20 years ago we had worked together on this committee.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started talking, one of the first things I said is I explained to people that what you have to understand about the farming community is that we start our people on committees really, really young. Like, I think Kelly and I were both only about 6 years old when we did that. And, looking back, we were quite young. Okay, we
Yeah.
weren't six. So we were probably in our early to mid 20s. I don't know, but yeah, we were quite young. But it was a great first experience into working with a diverse group of people.
Right.
People that until I had sat on that board with, I don't know if I knew any of them, or I knew very few
Okay.
of them very well. I knew a few of them, but some of those people I still run into today.
Okay.
Ralph Shantz, who was the Wilmot mayor for many years, is I consider him a good friend, and he was on that committee, and there were others as well, and so it was kind of my first experience in working with people that I didn't know at all before we sat together.
Right.
But we had a common goal, we had a common cause, and we used our various bits of knowledge and strength to make what was at the time a very popular and I think smooth running events.
Yeah. Yeah. So very good. So is that how kind of a number of the boards or committees that you've sat on, is that kind of how they've come from around events or things like this that fit into your work, what you were doing in agriculture and farming and running an orchard, that kind of thing, Ontario Food?
Yes, so at least four of the boards that I've sat on over the years have been kind of directly related to
Okay.
my work.
Yeah.
Three of them really, including that one, really centered around local food,
Okay.
and so local food has become kind of one of my passions, one of my hobbies. Um, and I've had the opportunity to do a fair amount of speaking on the subject around the province. Sometimes it's related to also Martins and the history of Martins and so on. But speaking at local clubs, seniors groups, schools, the university classes specifically regarding different aspects of growing and marketing. Just a wide variety of different organizations over the years, environmental organizations, whatever. And just with time, that is, when you spend enough time talking about or doing or researching or living a certain thing, it does, I guess, just automatically become a bit of a passion. And so at least four. Three of them very definitely local, and one more. It's actually one of the two boards that I'm still sitting on today. The Food Processing Skills Canada, which is a Canadian-wide organization that is geared towards helping food processors with their skills. Human resource management skills, and so on. That one has kind of an interesting story. Maybe I'll get into it a little bit later, but yeah, I would say all of those four were specifically related to my work, and that was the entrance level to how I got into that. Yeah.
So do you get asked by the board that's in place, or how does it end up that you get on a board like that?
So that's a good question, and each board is a little bit different in how it works. So some boards are fairly active at recruiting other members.
Okay. Yep.
Obviously from within their membership.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
But you know, they'll kind of go out and ask people if they're interested, and then it depends on their bylaws as to how you actually become a board member. So you
Okay.
may have to be elected, you know, at an annual meeting.
Okay.
But generally, you have some pre-warning. You've been asked ahead of time or nominated by someone or
Okay,
whatever
yep.
the case may be. So each one is a little bit different. They and sometimes it's just simply been they need, you know, there's sometimes where it's just they need seats. They need people
Right,
that are
yeah.
willing, you know, they need
Yep.
And other times it's more considered a bit of an honor to do that, and so it's not a matter of them finding people that are willing, but they're also looking for specific skills,
Okay.
or
Yep.
they're looking for you know, somebody to represent an area.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
That
Yeah.
that
Especially
you know,
when it's
when
covering
it's
a larger,
provincial
yeah.
or a
Yeah.
national, that can be that they're looking for an area or you know, in the national one, I represent the fruit and vegetable
Oh, okay.
sector. There's others that represent the meat and some that represent fish and some that represent beverage.
Okay, wow.
And you know, a whole bunch of different. So in that particular board, they not only have to see that they have that it's about a 14-member
Okay.
board, that one. They not only have to see that they have representation across the province, across the country, they also need representation of the different sectors.
Right, yeah.
That particular one I got on because I was first asked, it's probably 12 years ago now or
Okay.
more. I was first asked to be on it's more than 12 since I was asked. I was asked to be on a research committee to determine whether an organization like this was needed at all.
Okay. Interesting, yeah.
And at that point, it was set up like a sector council. Canada had at that point had a series of sector councils, probably close to 30, that represented all the different sectors. So like there was a mining,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
there was an agriculture, there was a retail, there was a transportation, there was a tourism, you know, all of the different sectors each had a sector council, and these sector councils were specifically for the purpose of dealing with the human resource issues within their
okay.
sector. And there was a fisheries sector council, but there was not a food processing as such. And so they were looking, fisheries was just barely large enough to really have their own sector council. And so they were looking at the possibility of incorporating all of the food processing into that. And that's what our committee was. So I was on a larger, it was probably close to 20 members from across Canada that met on 3 or 4 different occasions to look at all the pros and cons of putting together such an organization. And then eventually it was determined, yes, it was a good idea. The organization was formed. It needed to get government approval to form, and it was formed. And then I was asked to be one of the board members on the initial part of it. So basically, not all of the members were, but there was a group of us that were asked to be. So that's how I came on that one. Interesting enough, though, I only served a year, and it's a long story. I'm not going to go into that now, how that all happened, but I voluntarily resigned after a year because there was too many from my sector.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yep.
And then about 5 or 6 years later, there was an opening again for different reasons that I won't get into. that position came open, and then they came and actively asked me if I would be willing to again sit on it,
Okay.
and I've sat on it ever since. So again, there's
Different ways it
different
happens.
ways,
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you're elected, sometimes it's kind of appointed.
Okay. Yeah. So you've served on a number of boards kind of within your sector, within your type of work and in food and that kind of thing. Are there other types of organizations that you've sat on the board as well?
Yeah, so I have also sat on, so most of these are what you call nonprofit.
Right. Even the food ones?
Even the food one,
Yeah.
they're considered nonprofit. Interesting enough, the one I was just referring to, even though it's a nonprofit, it no longer is a sector council. The sector councils all kind of disappeared, or more
Okay.
or less disappeared. The vast majority of them. The reason being is that they were largely funded by the government.
Okay.
So the way they worked is they were given a certain amount of money for what they call core funding,
Okay.
which was to run their offices and to run their immediate staff and their board costs and so on. But then they applied for projects, which to do like specific research projects,
Yeah.
or maybe writing a safety manual for,
Yeah.
it could be
Yeah.
a whole bunch of different things. The vast majority of the safety stuff and so on out there has been done through projects
Okay.
like that. They'd apply for projects where they'd be given a certain budget, and then they'd hire staff or whatever to complete these projects
Yep.
under that. Well, back about 10 years ago, so 3 or 4 years after this food sector council was formed that I was part of, the government cut all core funding
Okay.
to sector councils. I was not totally against it, because I think they did a lot of good work in their time, but there was starting to be a fair amount of overlap.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and so on, and there was some 20 sector councils,
Okay,
and they
yeah.
were, the core funding for each one of them was anywhere from a low of about $1 million to a high of about $3 or $4 million, depending
Yeah.
on how big a sector it was. So a lot of money going into this, especially. So basically, they said you can still run your organization,
Okay.
but you've got to find ways to be sustainable.
Okay.
We're not paying anything to keep you going. We will still give you projects if you
Oh, you can still apply
them.
for it,
You
yeah.
can still apply for projects that are needed, but we're not doing any core funding. Most of them just said, that's it. We can't exist then.
Yeah.
They had no way. We had an executive director that was really, really good.
Okay.
And she is, and then her successor was equally good as well, and she had a vision that
Wow.
she can run this like a business. So even though it's a nonprofit, she looks at everything and says it's got to be sustainable, and we've got to make enough money to keep
Right.
the organization going. And which a nonprofit may do. A nonprofit may make a profit. They just may not. Their purpose isn't to make a profit. Their purpose
Right.
is simply to make enough profit to keep themselves operating, so they can store up for a rainy day.
Okay, that
Say,
idea, yeah. And you can like make money to pay a staff and that kind of thing.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. That nonprofits do hire a lot of people.
Right,
Okay,
yeah.
so but it's just so it's a little bit different than a charitable. Where a charitable, at least in Canada, in the U.S., nonprofits and charitables get really mixed up.
Oh, I see. There's a
they
fine-
call
there's-
they call their charitables nonprofits.
Okay.
Here we have two distinct differences.
see,
We have
okay.
charitable, which is it where you're really it's not profit at all. It's yes, charitable can hire staff and so on
Right.
too, but you have to be very distinct in the funds that you're pulling in. you have to tell the people this is going to be
Yeah.
used for this is going to be used
Yeah.
for that, and you don't really, you do fundraisers, you might say, but you're not running a business for the or whatever for
Yeah.
the purpose of, whereas a not-for-profit, it's not charitable. You can't give out charitable receipts,
Right.
okay, for the money coming in. So generally how a not-for-profit works is either through membership dues of an organization
Okay,
that they're serving, or organizations that they're serving, or they're offering some kind of service where they're making just enough on to be sustainable.
Okay.
But in essence, the difference is, though, that you cannot give out charitable receipts even if people make donations to it.
Gotcha. So is there still a tax break compared to a for-profit
Yeah,
organization?
so a
there's
not-for-profit doesn't have to pay income tax on the money there.
Okay, yeah.
So if they do, so in a given year, if they, at the end of the year, they came through with $100,000 profit,
Yeah.
they don't have to declare it as they still have to do an income statement
yeah.
and everything. They have to declare it, but they don't have to pay tax on it.
Yeah, so there's an advantage to being a not for profit.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But there's certain classifications that you come into. So if a not-for-profit would all of a sudden be have millions of dollars in the bank and whatever, yeah, there's a certain point where they might their not-for-profit status might be challenged.
Some
But
questions might start being asked.
Yeah, but at this point, even $1 million, depending on the size of an organization, might only keep you running for a year if, in fact, you had a bad year. So.
Yeah. So a lot of those organizations that you've been talking about already, are they not-for-profits but not charitable organizations?
Yeah,
Is that right?
so
Okay.
most commonly, I've been on a few charitable, but most commonly, most of the organizations that I've sat on have been not-for-profit. I've had at least one corporate
Okay.
that I sat on, which I'll again talk about in a little bit. That one is related to insurance of all things.
Okay.
So very different than some of my other experiences. And I have on a few charitable, like the other one that I'm sitting on presently is actually an arts organization. So it's Oasis Chorale,
Right.
which is very different than anything else I've ever done.
Okay.
And I wasn't so much brought on because of my ability to, in this case, sing. Even though I do love good music, especially good choral music, and have loved that for many, many years, it was more because of my board experience when they, a number of years back, were looking to become a little bit more organized, and they formed an official board that they were just looking for some board experience, and that's why I was brought on in that case. So specifically for what I bring, which as I said earlier is often a reason why boards will look, a good board will look at what are the deficiencies when they're looking for new members. They'll look at what are their deficiencies, what are the skills or the talents that they presently need to bring to the board level to add to whatever it is that they're promoting or doing.
Yeah.
And then use that as their criteria as to who they will ask.
Okay. Yeah. So rather than just filling a seat, trying to find someone that will complement the other members well and fill in gaps and things like that.
Correct. And that's a key factor, gaps.
Yeah.
Where are the skill gaps in the organization? What do we need? Do we need somebody in finance, that will give us a better handle of our finances? Do we need somebody that's especially skilled at fundraising?
Right.
Maybe we need somebody that has an into a certain group of people that we're targeting to become part of our organization.
Has a relationship there or something.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So, well, you've mentioned that or just kind of mentioned a little bit some of the boards that you've served on or currently serving on. Were you gonna talk some about a little more on some of the what those organizations are like, or just some of your experiences with them, or did you kind of say what you wanted to about that specifically?
Yeah. I don't know that I have a lot to say specifically about any of them. Probably the corporate experience, the insurance experience that I had was unique and different from a lot of the others in the sense that it was a for-profit
Yeah.
organization. That one started out mainly because I was a director in a mutual aid company, which wasn't actually an insurance company, but provided mutual aid to the Mennonite community through for property value. So it was
Okay.
kind of, instead of insurance, you could have a policy, as it were. They didn't call them policies, but it's really more or less what they were.
Okay. Yeah.
For property, fire and storm,
Right.
and so
Yep.
on. And I was the director for our church. The way it was set up, this is back in the 90s, and this was an old organization. It went back to the mid 1800s. I think it started
Okay.
in 1865.
Wow.
So it was in process. It was doing stuff almost before insurance companies were even a thing.
Okay.
It was that old.
Yeah.
But it did it specifically to a faith community. They did in Ontario. They served primarily. It started out primarily the local Mennonite community, but it expanded throughout Canada.
Okay.
And we also wrote a fair amount of policies in northern New York State as well.
Okay.
And it the way they kind of worked is each congregation had a director. And you wrote sometimes. There were not every congregation had one, so sometimes directors wrote for people outside of their immediate church group.
Okay.
And obviously people move around to different churches and so on, and they didn't necessarily switch directors just because they switched churches. And so there were with time, it wasn't necessarily that you had just your own people from your church, but the church that I was part of at that point in time, what was happening in that organization is a lot of the directors were getting older,
Okay. Yeah.
retirement age or older, and weren't really looking to take on new people. And we had a fair amount of young families in our group that were buying homes or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And so we didn't have our own director, and we asked if the church wondered if it'd be all right if we would. And so I was given that responsibility then, back I think in '94.
Okay.
So when I started that, and immediately a bunch of directors just handed me their book of business of people that were from our church. And so I started off with about 40
Oh wow.
members, and built that up to, I think, just under 100 over
Okay.
a period of 6 or 7 years. Then in around 2000, and I won't get into all the details, but there were factors that started to make, there was starting to be a fair amount of pressure at that point in time. Some of it actually came from insurance companies because even though we were not an insurance company, we weren't a licensed insurance company, we were providing the services for all intents and purposes of an insurance company.
Yeah, right.
And so there was getting to be some pressure. It was looked like unfair competition.
Okay.
And so it was decided that, perhaps we should become a licensed insurance company.
Okay.
To meet all the criteria of the law. And, I still have some mixed feelings about that. I was supportive of it for the organization where it was at, and I won't get into all those reasons.
Yeah.
But there were some things about it, quite frankly, we weren't, even though we joined up with a whole bunch in the U.S. of similar organizations, about 10 organizations joined together. Even so, we were, for all intents and purposes, still a very small insurance company.
Right.
And there were all kinds of things that came into play there. But one thing it did for me is I certainly learned a lot about the insurance industry.
I believe it.
I actually took an agent's course here in Ontario.
Good for you.
That I never became a licensed agent, but I could have if I would have accepted a job.
Okay.
In a local agency or insurance company, which I actually had one offer. But I learned enough about it to know that I wouldn't have really been happy in the job, even though I did well at the thing. But it was that, I figured if I'm going to be on the board of one of these, I better at least understand insurance. And I eventually sat on a board that was international in like it was U.S., Canada. It was centered out of Kansas. Meant a lot of trips over the years to Kansas City.
This isn't that that organization then that the mutual aid group that you were a part of joined with?
Yeah.
Or it was that one?
It was that one.
Okay,
so I sat on the executive for the last few years that mutual aid. So they had out of the 60-some directors, they had a 5-person board executive.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Okay. And I was elected onto that just for the last, I think, 2 or 3 years that it existed.
Okay.
And kind of saw it, was involved in its closing up shop, as it were, which was also a different experience.
Yeah.
And then went on to sit on, first initially, there was the board work of the bigger organization was made up of several smaller boards.
Okay.
Because there were different parts of the organization.
Yep.
But eventually I ended up sitting on the actual international main board.
Okay.
And did that for about 6 or 7 years until eventually they sold off their Canadian part of the business.
Oh, okay.
And that's when I came off of that one.
Okay, so it was a for-profit corporation.
That was a for-profit corporation.
Okay, yeah. So, well, maybe just from your experience, what's kind of the goal of a corporation having a board? Like, I kind of get why a nonprofit or charitable organization has a board to run things or govern things, but what's the purpose for a for-profit business?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's different for I mean, the stated goal may be slightly different for different organizations. Yeah. However, really, when it gets down to it, I would argue that the goal should center around much the same thing, and really not that much different than nonprofits or such. Like, I think sometimes boards for nonprofits and so on are also misunderstood as to what their actual role is.
Okay.
And sometimes it's the way it's set up. So very small not-for-profits, a board may almost be like a working board. Yeah. Where they do everything.
And that's my experience on a very small charitable organization board is we kind of are the
Yeah, and ideally, I would argue that that's not necessarily ideal. Mm-hmm. I mean, I understand sometimes it's almost a a necessity if you're a very small organization and you can't afford to hire staff and so on.
Right.
And yeah, a lot of organizations do start out that way. I would call that a working board.
Okay. Yep.
And the people, if you're going to be on that type of a board, yeah, you need to have a fair amount of drive and a fair amount of commitment, because that it can take a lot of time. You're putting in a lot of volunteer time to do everything from
Right. Yeah.
book work to you name it.
Fundraising.
A more ideal scenario is where you actually have staff that are doing the day-to-day work, and they're making the decisions on running the organization, right, and everything. And the board is there primarily to give vision and direction, and to be the overseeing hiring body of the executive.
Okay. So by the executive, you
by
mean...
executive, and that can vary. It obviously that depends on the organization. In a lot of boards that I am, the only people that they really only hire one person, and that is the CEO.
Okay, yeah.
Or the president, or whatever, however you have it structured, right, what you call the main person, and then the CEO is responsible for hiring everyone under him. Yep. Often that CEO will sit in on all meetings except for what are termed in board lingo as in-camera sessions.
Okay.
Occasionally, and I would argue that all boards should have at least one or two in-camera sessions a year, which simply means sessions where only official board members
right
are present. So they're closed board meetings to other board meetings you might have other staff sit into as they're needed or as they're relevant. So it can be like senior management. Yeah, I've sat on boards where you have almost as many senior management sitting around as you actually have board members, and that's fine. They don't have a vote, but they bring the reports of what's happening to the meeting so that you can make decisions and give relevant advice. But you're not actually running the organization. That is the job of the hired staff.
Right, yeah.
And so to get to your question, why would a corporate board or a corporate organization need a board? Well, first of all, if a corporate organization is publicly owned.
Yeah, like publicly traded
exactly. Then I'm not totally clear on what the mandate is exactly in an organization like that, but I'm guessing in most cases they would have from the owners, from the shareholders, they elect people to represent them on this board. Now,
right. Yeah.
Often in those public, there's certain shareholders that own massive amounts of, and so obviously they'll have more say as to who sits on the board than somebody that might just hold 2 or 3 shares.
Right.
Okay. And that's often so. Those in that case, it's probably I'm assuming it's law that they have to have a board.
Yeah, I think so.
That represents the interests of the shareholders.
So it's basically the owners of the representation.
Yeah, it's representation of the owners. Yeah. Now, there are privately owned corporations. Especially larger privately owned corporations that have boards.
Yeah.
And in that case, it's more of it's an advisory type thing.
Okay. Yeah.
So they'll pay other professionals. It might be even CEOs of other companies.
Right.
or whatever. Often it'll be, not necessarily somebody that has a direct conflict of interest,
Okay,
whatever.
yeah.
It'd be, that wouldn't, but it may be an owner of another company that's totally different, but they bring them in as advisors, and they pay them considerable amounts of money.
Okay.
I'm not, part of. I haven't been part of many boards where you actually get paid.
Okay.
To per se, to actually do other than maybe a per diem or whatever.
Yeah.
But their per diems on some of those boards will be quite high.
Okay.
But they're paying for the expertise and the advice that these people bring,
Okay.
or in some cases it might even be the prestige. So they'll hire former politicians or big name people, and they want that.
They can
that
say
person.
we have him or her on our board.
They have, and sometimes it's for their lobbying ability that they have with governments or whatever. Those can all be reasons. In the case of the insurance company, it was owned by its policy owners.
Okay.
And so we as board members were representatives, largely for the policy owners.
Okay.
That we represented them as the their interests.
Right.
Is what we were supposed
Was it like a co-op kind of, or?
Kind of. It was set up a bit different than a co-op in legally language, but it was in that's the closest thing to you can kind of think of it in that way.
Yeah. No, very good.
It was a mutual company, so there's slightly different ways of how co-ops and mutuals are set up, but that gets into the weeds and legal stuff.
Well, no, thanks for asking or answering my question there on kind of what some of the some of the general differences are between some of those. And we might hear more about some of your experiences as we talk about it. But I thought maybe you could share from your experience. What do you see as some of the key things for a good functioning board? And it's probably different depending on what how the board's set up or what it's doing. But are there maybe some general principles that you've observed over the years that would help to, or that you see as being good things for a board to function well?
So as I said earlier, I see the board's primary function is to be a visionary, to look at where an organization can improve, can become more efficient, can grow, as the case may be. All within the vision that's been prescribed. And in some cases, I've been on quite a number of organizations that were just starting up. So a big part of our initial job was to develop that vision.
Right. Yeah.
What are we about and so on. And to do that, you need a variety of people.
Yeah.
You need different talents, different expertise, different experience. So a good board has a good variety within that board.
Okay. Yep.
That whether it's and again, it can be for lots of different reasons. Some of it can be, if it's over an area, it can be expertise that you bring from a certain culture or from a certain area, geographical area.
Yeah.
It can be expertise that you bring from a particular way of life or skill set.
Okay.
And so variety is a good thing, because what you're doing, one of the things that you need, a board's main purpose when they meet is expressing ideas to each other.
Okay.
Putting those ideas out on the table and hashing them out and saying, okay, we get all of this information together, and now we make decisions based on that. If you have a board that totally thinks 100% alike, they all come from basically the
Right. Yep.
same experience, whatever. That might, for a while, it might seem, well, that's a great thing because we all think alike, and so we're really going to get things done
Yeah.
because we're all so focused on. But the problem is that there becomes almost like an inbred tendency where, and you're liable. You become very vulnerable to dangerous blind spots.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, again, in my opinion, a big purpose of a board is to bring that varied experience together, and then based on that, you have a much better chance of making good decisions for the organization as a whole.
So you'd say one of the top priorities of a board is to have a good mix, a good variety, a good diversity of members from different experiences coming together. Like that's something that a board should keep as one of the top priorities when forming, when bringing in members.
Yes, I would say so. Now, I qualify that with saying that the other thing that you need is to whatever the focus of the organization is, you need people that have that passion.
Okay.
So you don't just bring people on. So in the case of the Oasis of the music thing that I have, I found out after the fact, and I was highly suspicious when I was first approached that that's what they were after. But I also knew that they wouldn't be satisfied with just somebody that had board experience. They needed somebody that also had a passion for choral music.
Right, okay.
Okay, that saw this as, something that was worth investing and spending time in, that saw it as a good thing. If maybe my I like a good variety of music. I can listen to a lot of different music and enjoy it. But if I would have been really geared to, say, Southern gospel, for example, and that would have been what I really, really liked and what I listened to 95% of the time, maybe this wouldn't have been the board for me, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Because the idea that I have a passion for this type of music just wouldn't have been there.
Yeah.
So I think you do need people with a passion for whatever it is that the board is or the organization is focused on doing. But within that, there's still lots of room for differences of opinion, and different outlooks that can be brought together to make that organization stronger.
Yeah, and is that the reason that often boards will govern themselves or have in their bylaws that there has to be a turnover, or at least some kind of turnover at a regular basis, or that you can only serve for a certain length of time, or you're up for renewal, or you have to get revoted on or something like that at a regular time? Is that to kind of keep it fresh, or the ability to bring variety on it at different points?
Yes, in fact, this is a pet peeve of mine. I have seen organizations literally almost disintegrate.
Okay.
Because of keeping board members on almost indefinitely.
Okay.
One of the early organizations that I sat on, I was never actually officially a director or board member, but I was a committee man on this organization for many years. And the way this organization, it was an Ontario-wide organization. It was called the Ontario Apple Commission.
Okay.
And it was responsible for the apple growing and marketing of Ontario Apple Marketing Commission is responsible for the growing and marketing of apples across Ontario. And it was made up of 9 different districts in Ontario, and each of the districts, the growers within each district elected 5 members that were called committeemen, and then those committeemen picked one of themselves to be the director officially representing the and so there would be 8 or 9 meetings throughout the year of the directors, and then several of those maybe about 2 or 3 of them, all the committeemen were invited to attend as well. So you were kind of an underling board member, you might say. And I sat on that organization for probably a little over 10 years as a committeeman. It also, so there was the 9 director board, and then I think there was 3 directors that were at large that were elected at large from all the committeemen. Plus there were like 5 directors that were like marketers specifically that came in a different way, which Dad would have been one of those for a time on there. And then I think Sandy was as well. And there was also some processing directors, and I think there was a consumer director and a retail. It was a big organization.
Yeah, sounds like it.
But here was the problem. They had, from the time that organization started, for the first 25 years of its existence, they had 1 chairman, 1 president, and a lot of the same directors for many, many years. They were reelected, and he was a good person. He was a very capable person. He knew the industry. He had I think initially had a really good vision. But it became, like I said, it became extremely inbred, and after a while, it was like what he said or nothing happened. And it became, and eventually it tore the organization apart. Eventually there was enough resistance to what it was, and eventually it just drove to so that the organization was literally disintegrated. It was made void, and eventually it was resurrected as a growers only, but not a marketing anymore. It didn't have the marketing powers that were behind it, and so on, which I think was actually a good thing in my mind. But that organization, I saw kind of the slow death of it.
Interesting, yeah.
Not because he wasn't a good person. I think he had a lot of good ideas, but you become blinded by one person's, and I don't care who you are and how good you are. A board is only as good as the ability to bring those varied ideas and to look for blind spots within. And if you have the same people year after year after year, you do develop blind spots. And the other thing that also becomes dangerous, if on top of that you also have the same top staff, executive staff, year after year after year, then it becomes even more important that the board at least is varied, because you might have a CEO that is extremely good at their job, and you may decide they're doing a good job, but if you have the same CEO and let's say the same chairman of the board for 20 years, after a while they become good friends. Almost for sure.
Right.
And they become so good friends that when if there's things that need to be said, need to be done to everybody becomes comfortable in their thing, and it becomes dead to what I would say in all organizations is needed change, needed foresight, and when there are issues, it almost becomes uncomfortable to deal with them because the friendship has almost overrid the professional relationship.
Right.
And that's very dangerous. And so while I say that in initial, sometimes it happens by default, because initially when an organization starts up, there is importance. There is, to a certain degree, that it is important that that initial passion and that initial vision stays current long enough to get that organization on good footing.
There are some benefits to continuity in those cases.
And so the best boards, in my mind, will allow for a certain amount of continuity, like maybe, a second term, like, having 2 5-year concurrent successive terms.
But they have to get revoted on maybe at that
after
that first 5
the
years
middle
is done.
one,
Yeah.
so you do have a chance to replace in the case of where you need something new or a new skill set or whatever the case may be. But I say that even for that, like, to go more than 10 years, even for a new organization, maybe to put something in the bylaws that you can bring someone back on for success of, after a year or two off, is not wrong. Because maybe there's within a certain community, a certain skill set is kind of rare and you need that.
Yeah.
Give you that opening, but to be very careful with it.
Interesting,
Because I have literally seen organizations really, really hurt, and by having board members stay on way too long.
Yeah.
And it's why I personally refuse to stay on, even if it's allowed in the bylaws. I basically almost refuse to stay on for more than 2 terms, or I really fight it. There has to be a really good reason.
Well, just in my short experience, there's been a few times where I think I kind of get into maybe a rut or something like that, where I think that the way we have it now is the best that it's going to be. And it's not that things are going poorly, but I've been surprised several times where I've thought, oh, this isn't going to go work well when someone in a key position moves on or gets replaced or something like that. I've been amazed at how often the person that steps in brings a different skill set, brings a different passion, or maybe a slightly different vision, but often will do really well, and it's often a good thing when some of those turnover happens and that kind of thing. So maybe it's even if it doesn't go on super long, like some of the situations you've been talking about, maybe there are good things that can come from that change and that turnover and that new blood.
One of the lessons in life that I think are it's really important that someone, or in my opinion, it's important that they learn early, and that is that nobody is irreplaceable.
Yeah.
And if you think you are, you probably should take a closer look at what you really think about yourself.
Yeah.
I understand, particularly an organization that's in its early stages or whatever. I understand that, certain people are very valuable to it, and an organization can be quite vulnerable at times based on that. But literally, that is actually part of the board's responsibility to ensure that an organization does not become too vulnerable to that type of thing, where they're too dependent on one person. Because if that is the case, we all know that can all change overnight.
Yeah.
None of us will live forever. Right. And so it's very, very, a healthy organization is one that sees that has mapped out plans for those type of scenarios, and whether it's board members, whether it's executive staff or whatever, has a contingency plan in place, because otherwise you really make the organization vulnerable. And so, yes, that's one of the things. There are, of course, other things that that are, in my opinion, good for are needed for good board working.
Yeah.
Another thing in my again my so a lot of the boards that I work and I prefer to work on a what I would call a consensus type
Okay.
environment.
What do you mean by that?
Where you work really hard at getting everybody on the same page,
Okay.
and you make decisions by consensus. So you discuss something maybe sometimes for hours, or maybe over the period of a few board meetings, but eventually you all agree that this is the route of
Okay.
action that we're going to take, and maybe you have a formal vote, but it's almost a formality
Okay,
at that
yep.
point, because you've all, with time, you may have started out from 3 or 4 different perspectives, looked at 3 or 4 different options, maybe even had, 3 or 4 different preferences of options that you were going to take. But in the end, after talking through different ideas, you arrive at a consensus that this way is the best.
Okay.
Now, that's ideal.
Right.
That's wonderful. In reality, it doesn't always work that way, or it very seldom works that way, actually. You often actually have to get to a place where you take a vote and you decide then. But even then, and this is the other side. So it's all right to be the odd man out. What you don't want in a board is you don't want a bunch of yes men. Or women. You want people that are not afraid to voice their opinions, even if it's a minority opinion.
Right.
And I have been the only person to vote no
Okay.
on situations. But when the decision is made, that's when you let it go.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
You don't keep trying to fight for it. Yeah.
If you can't live with the group decision, you probably shouldn't be on that board.
Okay. Yeah.
And so you do need to be able to work as a team member, but the primary thing of a board is not to be a yes person, but rather to be a person that actually brings out different opinions if that's necessary, because that's what you're there for.
Right. Yeah.
You're there to bring out these things that not everybody else thought of.
Yeah.
And it's your unique perspective that makes you valuable to the board.
Yeah.
So another key part of being a board member is being able to think for yourself and to think outside the box, if you want to use that cliche.
Right. Yeah.
But at the same time, then to be a team member. When a decision is made, you get in there and you support it, and you go from there.
Yeah.
And so those are again are what I would call key factors of being on a board. Another very key factor, if you're going to say yes to an invitation to be on a board, is you need to be available.
Oh yeah.
If you know that you're not going to be able to attend half the board meetings because you have too many other commitments, or you're too busy, you have no business saying yes to being on that board in the first place. For one thing, it's probably not enough of a passion of yours.
Yeah. Not a priority.
The fact of the matter is, good board members are busy people. They tend to be people that have a lot going, because they are, they have different skills that are needed and wanted in different places. It's all right to be busy, but when you commit to being on a board, you need to be at those meetings.
Yeah.
And so a board that's properly run is going to plan their meetings out, give enough notice for when they are, and so on, so that you can plan your itinerary so that it doesn't factor into that. But then you it's kind of then your responsibility to make sure that you plan the rest of your life around that.
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, there's always those emergency things
Yeah.
that happen. We all understand that. But I would argue that if you're missing more than one or two board meetings a year,
Mm-hmm.
that you're not really doing your job.
Okay. Yeah.
A lot of boards only meet 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year. Some that I sit on only meet twice a year.
Okay.
And in one case, we meet only one time a year face to face. And so if you are not present at those meetings, you're basically out of the loop.
Yeah.
You're just
Yeah.
not, and your ability then to really bring pertinent advice and suggestions becomes extremely limited.
Right. Even missing one meeting, if you're just meeting together once a year, you're kind of 2 years behind once you get to the next one. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I would say a very key part of sitting on a board is being available. Your attendance record on that board. I mean, if I'm looking for board members or whatever, one of the things I would be asking is, what is your attendance record on previous boards? I myself am not happy with myself if I miss even one meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
I think count on one hand the meetings that I've missed at boards that I've sat on in the last 20 years. And I don't say that as, that I'm better than other people, but for myself, it is just a high priority.
Yeah.
If I've said yes to being on a board, then I think I owe it to that board to be at as many of the meetings as possible.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. That don't commit to it or don't agree to serve on a board if you're not committed to being there. It's a simple decision at that point is what you should be making. Yeah. Yeah. You've mentioned a number of things here. Did you have other advice for board members that you wanted to share?
The only other thing is, be flexible in the roles that you're asked to play.
Okay.
Again, I alluded to this before, but I think the chair position or any of the other executive positions on the board, whether that's a secretary or treasurer, depending again how the board is set up.
Right.
Sometimes staff people will fill in some of those.
Right. Yeah.
Actual roles, but taking minutes and all of that stuff. But as far as being willing to fill in those roles depending on your talents, not everybody is geared or has what it takes necessarily to be a chair, and you don't need everyone to be able to do that position.
Right.
But the chair position is not so much I don't see it so much as a boss position as I see it as the position of trying to facilitate discussion and so on. The way most bylaws for boards, the chair generally doesn't have a vote unless it's a tiebreaker.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that he's not free to give his opinion and so on. He should, just like any other board member. He's leading out. A chair, the work of a chair is obviously, and it varies again depending on organizations. I've even chaired organizations where this executive director did a lot of the legwork, set up with my approval, the agenda of meetings and all of that stuff. And, certainly that's nice when you have that. I've also been part of where the chair had to do all of that and so on. And so it's extra commitment. But, invariably, it's like I say, it's not so much a boss role as a facilitator role, and I think that's important to remember. The other thing, and this isn't so much a thing about board members, but more about how boards work. I personally like a degree of formality.
Okay. Yeah.
In board work. Now, I'm not a stickler for that Robert's rules.
Yeah. I make a motion or whatever.
Yeah. Well, are exactly enforced. However, when it gets down to important decisions, I think that at least it's good if in the bylaws that there are certain things. So motions, seconded, discussion, voted on, and all the things that go around that. If some of that is followed, the reason. So again, I talked earlier that I prefer consensus type things.
Yeah.
But even then, you still need that formal motion to enact something, to make it official, to add it into the minutes, to give it official responsibility so that it can come back and know this decision was made and so on.
Yeah.
And where it becomes especially important is when there are disagreements or when there are differences of opinion. You need to have that organizational rule-based thing to come back at, so that it doesn't just become a free-for-all, so that the biggest personality in the room eventually calls the shots, or whatever the case may be. Because that's what happens if you don't have effective rules. The other thing, the larger the organization, the larger the group sitting around the board, the more important it is that you have some semblance of order.
Yeah.
And I have seen where very, very large organizations have their meetings and they follow those rules right down to a T.
Okay.
And I've seen why it's so necessary.
Yeah.
If you see one of those working, if you wouldn't have those rules, it would just be a disaster. You would never get anything done.
Is there even a procedure to who speaks next and that kind of thing?
Oh, there can be. Yeah. I mean, it can be very precise as to exactly how that's all done. I mean, you can make it as precise or as open as you want on a lot of those things. But having certain procedures and rules in place as to how things are done at meetings really facilitates towards orderliness.
Yeah.
And even towards more effectively coming to decision and so on, rather than having things drag on forever.
Oh, for sure. Like even from on some small committees that I've been on or led, even I found that the more you follow just little rules like that, it's really clear on what decisions we came to, what whose job it is to do something going forward or something like that. Yeah. I just find it so much clearer if we take the time to go through some of those procedures.
It is, and it can even save a lot of time. Now, I mean, that is where a chair often can really help to facilitate the speed of a meeting.
Yeah.
But it's a fine line, because you do want to give people opportunity to voice themselves. Where the chair's responsibility is, once it starts to be repetitious, once you start to have the same things being said, it's time to just call a vote, or move on, as the case may be. The chair can do a lot to keep things moving in those situations. And I don't claim to have figured that all out yet. I tend to be a bit long-winded, as you can tell here, and so I have to be careful myself in situations like that. But
very good. I think we're getting close to time to wrap it up here, and at the end I'll just give you a couple minutes if there's anything that you wanted to say yet that you didn't have a chance to. But not everyone that listens to this will probably be serving on a board or have served on a board. So do you have any advice to non-board members that are involved in an organization, or people that might interact with boards, whether it's being maybe interacting with a charitable organization or in other ways, that kind of thing. Do you have any advice for non-board members in their interactions with an organization?
Well, I would say, first of all, if you have a concern about an organization or how an organization is operating, maybe you have questions about it. Generally speaking, the person or the people to go to are the staff themselves.
Okay.
I'm talking about outsiders that aren't necessarily working for it directly.
Yep.
The staff, that's your first. And if you are a staff person working under a CEO or whatever, you don't directly, in most cases, you don't directly answer to the board.
Right.
You answer to the CEO. That doesn't mean that you can't, in either case, that you couldn't at times direct concerns or whatever to the board.
Okay.
If you figure that it's like this is a policy issue.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that's the difference. So if you're dealing with day-to-day operating issues, then you should be dealing at the staff level. If you're dealing with significant philosophy issues, or the actual not operation of, what's the word I'm looking for, but actually the nature of the board and those types of things. Mm-hmm. That's, I think, when you maybe have an avenue to speak specifically to the board.
Yep. More on the things that they're dealing with, like the board's more on vision and
exactly,
some of those bigger things. Yeah.
Say if it has to do with those vision issues, those types of things, or if it specifically has to do with the CEO, because that is, as I said before. Again, going in, if you're really interested and really concerned about it, finding out what the board's, what the organization's actual organization looks like, what their organizational chart looks like, and so on, can all be helpful, and should be things that are available to you as a member of that organization or as an interested person if you're a contributor or whatever. Those things should all be available to you, and that can be helpful as to know who and what to address.
Right, yeah.
But board, sometimes boards will specifically put out requests to broader membership for input and so on. And certainly those are definitely times where, whether it's at annual meetings in the form of a survey or whether it's, later phone calls or emails, boards do really, really value, at least boards that I have sat on, they value the input. Often they can hardly get enough of it from the broader organization, and anything that you can suggest. And if you have interest in, maybe if a person is interested in becoming a board member, if you're a younger person out there and you think, I'd like to be involved in forming and helping to grow these organizations, and you think you would bring something to it, that can be a great place to start. Show interest, where there's opportunities, going to the annual meetings or going to other meetings that are open to the public and filling in those questionnaires, even signing your name to it. If that's an option, letting know that you're really interested, having discussions, asking questions. Sometimes just whatever, boards take note of people like that. And they keep them in mind for future reference when they're looking for replacements.
No, it's very good. Yeah, well, I've appreciated and enjoyed the hearing the things that you've had to share. Is there anything else that you wanted to say yet before we wrap it up?
I don't think so. I enjoyed my time. It went a lot faster than I was expecting. It's amazing. I mean, I can't imagine, somebody actually listening to this. It won't seem like it went that quick, I'm sure, but I enjoyed it. One of the things I'll say in relation to this board and giving direction, it's something that my dad said. I remember him saying I bet Dad was barely 50 when he said this. He was much younger, so obviously I was probably only in my teens.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly. But I remember him saying something to the effect that life is kind of funny. He said, up until the time you're 50, he said, people kind of, they'll listen to your opinions or whatever, but in reality you can tell that they think, yeah, you're a little bit too young. You really don't know what you're talking about. You don't have the experience or whatever. Yep. And then you hit 50 and all of a sudden everybody wants your opinion and they kind of think that you should know something because you've been around. And then all of a sudden you're 60 and now you're just out of it. You don't really know what's going on. And I thought at the time, that's a bit cynical. But there is some truth to it, in the sense that that's kind of how life is. There is value in experience. There's no doubt about it.
Right.
We can learn from people that have gone through some things and experience. But having said that, I've sat on boards. The last while I've sat on boards where often I'm one of the oldest board members on it. Okay. I don't feel very old. And I really am excited and I value some of the youthfulness, the idealism that comes with youth and the perspectives that they bring to the board. So don't ever let somebody tell you that you don't know anything just based on your age or your experience. At the same time, or vice versa, that you're too old, that you can't contribute. Obviously, we have our peaks. There's no doubt about it. But also don't disvalue what experience brings and so on. And if you are called to be part of an organization, to sit on a board or whatever, enjoy it, make the best of it. It can be, I value, over the years, I have made just tons of acquaintances. Some people who are my friends long after we aren't serving on a board anymore, from a wide variety of people that I feel has just broadened my perspective of life in a way that has enriched me and allowed me to be a much fuller, better person because of it. And I wouldn't give up those relationships for anything, that they are just extremely valuable. And that is maybe a side benefit of being on a board, but it certainly has been one for me. And so if you were asked, give it serious consideration. Remember, you need to have a passion. But if you have a passion for whatever it is that you're asked, go for it.
Yeah.
The organizations need people with vision, with experience, and with energy, and you may just be the person that they're looking for.
Yeah, well, it's some good advice, some good things to think about, and I think a good place to wrap it up. So I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much, Steve, for sharing from your experience and some of the things that you've learned. And I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. So thank you.
Thank you, Roland.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you, Steve, for sharing your knowledge with us. I really liked the encouragement that he gave for me to think well about whether I have the passion, the vision, and the time to serve on a board or a committee or to be part of an organization, and to think about those things before agreeing or deciding to serve on a board. So thank you, Steve, for sharing those things with us. As always, I'd love to have you drop me a message if you have thoughts or things to share about the show. And you have a few days yet before Ricky and I record our question and answer episode coming up on September 29th. So send me an email at contact@everydayexpertise.ca if you have anything to say or ask. And as always, you can check out the website, everydayexpertise.ca, for more information about the show. That's all for now. Join me again next week to learn from the expertise of everyday people.